Is it all right if I start, Carl? You can just hear, can't you?
Yeah, carry on, please.
Yeah, okay. So, sorry you've got me. Councillor Pandor, unfortunately, isn't very well, and so hasn't been able to come today. So, as the deputy, I'm in the chair. So here I am, and some of you know it's my last session as well. So I was hoping for an easy ride today. Perhaps you'll give me one anyway. Maybe you'll give me one anyway. Yes. Apologies for absence. What have we got there, Miles?
Apologies for absence have been received from Martin Booth, Deb Hetherington, Councillor Michael Graham, Amir Hussain, Councillor Ashley Mason, Professor Nick Plant, Councillor Shabir Pandor, Paul Price, Palvinder Singh, Councillor Alex Rosshaw, Dr Martin Stowe, Lee Viney, Philip Wilson, Simon Wright and Neville Young.
Who needs them anyway? All the best people are here, so that's fine. Does anybody have any declarations of disclosable pecuniary interest, particularly bearing in mind?
I'll declare this. I'll link with the Lifespan, that business engagement group we're going to discuss later on.
Okay, thank you for that, Carl. Any other bits? Good. No, okay. I don't think we have any exempt information or possible exclusion of the person public today, unless anybody else has got a different view on that. Oh yes, item 11. Yes, okay. So we'll do item 11 after the
So
formal
item 11 is just an information only item, Chair. So we only need to raise that if people have got questions on that item.
Fine. Okay. And another thing just to say on process is that although the agenda calls for 3 hours today, I'm hoping that we'll be finishing before 4. Yeah. Okay, so a little bit of an update from me. We're in the pre-election period, which is what we call it now. There was another word that we don't use anymore, apparently. I don't think that's going to affect us at all here. I don't think there's anything that we would normally say that is difficult, and we're generally pretty apolitical anyway, so I think I'm just saying that for formality's sake, really. And that increasingly I'm feeling in this regional combined authority space, the national politics probably don't need to apply, and we need to be thinking more about how everything can be done in a more cross-party manner anyway, so that we can have the longer timescales that these programmes that we try and run on. But no idea if anyone's listening to me as I say that, but I think it would be a good idea if the people outside this room did. We're going to have a report on the some of the things that the budget said in the next item, but there's one particularly important thing that was announced by Mr Hunt in the budget about investment zones. There are 12 new investment zones. Do people follow this? Yeah, I'm getting plenty of nods. Good. Okay. So we were delighted that as West Yorkshire we got one of the 8 English ones. So some people didn't, in other words, but we did. So that's good. It's up to £80 million on a flexible spend. We're waiting for guidance on actually how that's going to work, the mechanics of it, and that's due in the next couple of weeks. And there's now starting to be discussion with partners about how we do this, and we'll need to have our ideas together by the summer. But I guess that's something that could be discussed by this group, actually, if people have got particularly strong ideas on that. So if people want to speak about that, maybe do put something in under the economic update. That would be an appropriate place to feed that in if you've got any thoughts on that. I've got a few remarks on the LEP changes, the Local Enterprise Partnership. We talked about that last time, so I think people are aware of the changes that are happening around the country, and what we said last time continues to apply here, that we've, broadly speaking, as West Yorkshire, made the changes that are being recommended that everybody do now. So the fact that we've got councillors and private sector members around this table is the main thing, and Councillor Pandor would normally be chairing, but I'm doing it today, and I think that's just an illustration of the partnership that we've had that really here for a long time, and I don't think anybody here will notice any difference, but it's interesting that this model is now being pushed as what the rest of the country should be doing. I think we should feel pleased that we've been on the right track on that one all along, and it's nice that we don't have to change too much. Just while we're on the subject of the LEP, the LEP board recruitment is probably just starting now, is it?
Yes, that's right.
So if any of you are interested in being the next LEP board chair, now would be a good time to indicate. And it'd be great if somebody from this community wanted to step up and do that. So I'd encourage anybody who feels so moved to actually do that, because I think it would be good. The West Yorkshire Plan and Economic Strategy, which we talked about a lot at the last meeting, that feedback that we gave has been incorporated, and there's a new draft out now. I think the LEP actually did see that, and I think it's probably public domain, so if you're really interested in that, you can see it. The main thing that's happened now, I think, Phil, you might have been quite important in this, is that it's being restated now as 5 missions. So a lot of well, all the content really is as we discussed, but it's now being presented a slightly different way as 5 missions, and that was something that we also did in the manufacturing task force actually, and the reason for doing that is because I think it seems more compelling and easy to understand and more motivating for the people reading it, so I think that's why that's being done. The work on the economic strategy is ongoing, and that will be aligned with these 5 missions. And I've just suggested to Phil actually that at some future meeting, this group have a look also at the investment strategy, the West Yorkshire Investment Strategy, which is a sister document of the economic plan, and guides quite a lot of the levelling up funding, and that's the kind of driver for that. So I'm sorry, it's another weighty tome to have a look at, but it is potentially quite influential on what we do, so it probably is appropriate that this group at least cast an eye on it and be aware of it, because personally I wasn't, and I'm feeling that I ought to have been. Committee updates, so this one here, Henry, it's your last meeting, so I don't know how long you've been involved. Tell us how long you've been involved. 11 years, okay, wow. Every single one, never miss one. That is a hell of a record, isn't it? Fantastic. I'm glad I asked you because it says 10 years here, so ha. Yeah, okay. So we're going, it's also my last meeting, as most of you know as well, so I'm suggesting that we go to the pub afterwards. And Henry, I hope that you'll want to come and we can say some words maybe at a more informal occasion. But let me say on the record here, personal, very heartfelt thanks for your incredible work. I mean, you have been the soul of this particular part of the organisation for all of that time. You kind of inducted me when I started 9 years ago, and I've always felt that you've been very personally supportive, but also absolutely committed to this agenda and very effective really in how you've led the organisation. And I think that I always think of the growth service as one of your key things really, and it's always seemed to me that that's one of the most effective things that we do, and that you just quietly get on with that, and it really is the engine of what really affects a lot of the businesses in the region. So from me, thank you very much indeed. Okay. Just a point also, which I can't really take much part in, but I will just say, obviously, I'm having to go. The reason I'm going, those of you who don't realise, is that you get a maximum of 3 3-year terms, and my 9 years are up pretty much tomorrow, I think. So I'm going with a heavy heart, really, because I love this work, but I think the rule is a good one, because it probably is time for somebody else to step up, and that's kind of what I want to say now, actually, is it's time for somebody else to step up. So I'm looking around the table, and I'm saying there should be somebody here who should be able to do this. It's an important role from the point of view of convening the private sector members and being an encouraging and important person who has to do the induction and all that. And there is this role that I'm doing today, for example, of actually doing the deputy thing when you step up when Councillor Pandor or his successor can't make it. So it's a fun role. It's quite a privilege to do it, really, and I do hope that somebody around the table will think that that's what they would like to do next.
Just to say a few things on top of that, Andrew.
Okay.
Obviously, we might say a few words at the end of this meeting, formally and informally, about the fantastic kind of input you've had over the last 9 years on the committee, and hopefully we'll do that towards the end of the meeting. But just want to kind of register that on behalf of the combined authority here now. And secondly, in terms of your successor as deputy, we will be launching a process on that, so look out for that.
Good, thank you. So that's the introduction, fairly hefty, but some good chunky stuff in that. Let's, without more ado, go into the first of the papers, which is the economic update. And Tom is going to take us through this, I think. the spring budget you're going to talk about, aren't you? And then the discussion about the metrics, I think, is probably what you're looking for. So as we're listening to Tom, let's be thinking about giving him some input about the metrics that are proposed, and particularly the business health dashboard, which is part of what you're going to say. So over to you, Tom.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And just one thing to say on the economic paper. Part of the reason why it's so long is just because of how much stuff there is going on at the minute. It feels like we bounce from sort of one crisis to the next at this point, whether it be COVID, supply chains, the financial sector kind of shakiness that we've seen over the last couple of weeks or so. So just a big thank you for people that are engaging with this, and hopefully we can have a good discussion on the dashboard metrics as well. So just to briefly go through the kind of what was announced at the budget on the 15th of March. So the energy price guarantee, which was set at around £2,500 for households, that's been extended for a further 3 months. At the same time, however, the £400 rebate scheme is being withdrawn from April onwards. So we've estimated that will push actually up to a further 32,000 West Yorkshire households into fuel poverty. Now, the reason why we say up to rather than be a bit more definitive as we have been in the past is because there are some means-tested replacements for that. We just haven't been able to fully figure out where they'll land within West Yorkshire. But there will be a lot more households getting nothing from next week onwards. In terms of the budget itself, there was an awful lot of time focused on economic inactivity. We know that businesses are dealing with labour shortages, vacancies are remaining incredibly high, which is something we'll come on to later. But in terms of economic activity within West Yorkshire, of the working age population, there's roughly 350,000 economically inactive people. Around 80,000 of those are due to long-term sickness and a further 6,500 due to short-term sickness. Those percentages have increased pretty drastically from pre-pandemic levels. And if you compare Yorkshire to the national average, we weren't able to disaggregate it to a West Yorkshire level. We've got a bigger sickness problem than the country as a whole does. So that's a key problem that businesses are currently dealing with, and it's one of the main reasons why there is this labour shortage. In terms of the other big announcement, there was the childcare announcement for parents of children aged between 9 months and 3 years. There are currently 73,000 economically inactive people in West Yorkshire due to looking after family, looking after their home. Obviously, we can't disaggregate that between children and more senior people, but we know that of those 73,000, 62,000 are women. So there is a gender issue here. So hopefully, once the childcare provision actually goes through, it can help more women get back into work if they so desire. Other announcements at the budget were around things like fuel duty, tax credits for the creative sector, and changes to the R&D tax relief credits, particularly for SMEs. We're still waiting to see how that will what the fallout of that will be, but we are keeping a close eye on it because from the announcements, it looks like SME R&D tax credits will be watered down quite significantly. In terms of what the Office for Budget Responsibility is forecasting, the UK economy will avoid a technical recession this year, albeit only just. That's their focus on growth. They're expecting inflation to fall to around 3% by quarter for 2023. That's a greater reduction than was previously anticipated. It's helped by the price cap staying at £2,500, and the expectation is that the Ofgem price cap, which is what the policy was prior to energy prices spiking, that will go beneath the energy price guarantee later this year as wholesale gas prices feed through. On the business side, of course, businesses will default onto the two-tier support system from next week, with a large amount of businesses getting the kind of base level of support. Some businesses getting the enhanced support, but not as much as we sort of estimated we'll need it in West Yorkshire. So we're still anticipating a shortfall of about 5,000 businesses that should get that enhanced support that probably aren't. Now, in terms of the living standards picture, now this is something that I've talked about quite a lot. West Yorkshire living standards going into this crisis were lower than the national average. Living standards across the country are expected to have their biggest fall since the Second World War. So living standards for West Yorkshire coming out of this crisis are almost certainly going to be worse than the overall country too. So we've got this real squeeze at the minute on businesses who are still dealing with high import costs, increased taxes from next month, but also households seeing their consumer spending or potential consumer spending squeezed. And with inflation going up to 10.4% last month, when the market was predicting 9.9%, there are still clear problems here, particularly in the food sector, who are dealing with, I mean, if you went to a supermarket in February, shortages were a big problem, and in some goods still persist to an extent. Now, in terms of how sort of the central bank's responding to this, interest rates have gone up to 4.25%. The question now is, how far will they go? With the financial sector shaking us over the last kind of couple of weeks, this question of do we keep going has become more prominent. I suspect what will happen will be central banks will essentially start following what the Federal Reserve do, which is a central bank in America, but it is becoming a more contentious policy area, if you like. Now, in terms of the dashboard, which Chair mentioned, this is something that we've been building for a few months now. The primary purpose of it is to get a more live, a more up-to-date understanding of business data that's out there, basically. We've had the crisis. Hopefully we'll get to the good bits at some point. We'll get to an environment of growth. And we want to be able to track this on a more live basis than quite a lot of data is produced. So we've done a bit of an audit to figure out what data we can get, how it relates to businesses, and how we can actually use it. So some of the metrics that we've sort of identified are in point 2.13. So it's things like claimant counts, vacancy rates, new business registrations, business liquidations, SME debt levels, and then business sentiment indicators as well. So I think my ask is around, do you think those metrics are a good starting point? And secondly, are there any other metrics that you think would be useful or that you could point us to that you think would be helpful for this, conscious that the entire purpose is that it needs to be updated on a pretty frequent basis. If the data is annual, it's still useful and we will use it in things like state of the region, but it's not suitable for this dashboard. So some of the key insights that we found so far is that there was around 1,900 business startups in West Yorkshire in February, compared to around 1,400 business liquidations. So we've got a net of around 500 new businesses there. That you often see that as economic times get tough. Equally, on some of the sectors, they are quite sort of sectors that have a lot of churn within them, like construction, for instance. But we're also seeing sectors like the arts and entertainment being overrepresented in the liquidations data, which might be to do with the squeeze on household income that I mentioned earlier on. So that's just to kind of give you a flavour of how we're using the dashboard. The intention is to have a public version at some point, but also an offline version. Is the data that we've sort of noted, are they a good start for 10? And then secondly, what are we missing? Sorry. What page are we on? Where's the dashboard? So the dashboard is 2.13. 2.13, yeah. Yeah. So the dashboard was initially presented to let board kind of with an outline of. That's good. So these dashboard metrics were presented to let board, who provided some useful feedback, which we are incorporating around comparing West Yorkshire with other areas, likewise being able to compare between districts and over a decent time period. But yeah, if anyone else has got feedback, we're happy to hear and happy to engage with you on this to make sure that it is actually a useful resource. Thank you, Chair.
Good, thank you very much indeed, Tom. For what it's worth, my remark is that I think that the dashboard looks good. It's nice to have something that is a bit, I think it's meant to be a bit more immediate, isn't it? Because we do track a lot of things, but a lot of them are actually on kind of really quite long time scales, whereas these are the ones that are meant to say, you know, I guess, raise a red flag if there are a particular problem. Would you say that looking at what the dashboard is telling us at the moment, you know, what is the message? Is it getting worse quickly? Is that really what you think that information is telling us, or what's it saying?
So I think to an extent it's sort of saying what, you know, this committee's mentioned as well as left board. So on the vacancies side, which is something that we're tracking, vacancies are still remaining pretty high. And if you look at how vacancies have changed between West Yorkshire and the national picture, vacancies in West Yorkshire is a far bigger problem than it is nationally. And that seems to be that seems to bear out from the conversations we've had in this group and Let Board, and equally the ONS releases national data, and that kind of bears a similar message. So we've got that on the vacancies front still being a problem. On the sectors that are perhaps starting up or liquidating quicker than we'd anticipate, certainly on the liquidations side of things, that's saying sort of messages that I suppose you would expect. So as I say, arts and entertainment has been particularly hit by squeezes on living standards. Equally, manufacturing is also overrepresented on the liquidation side, presumably because of things like the increased energy cost, increased raw materials cost, and other input costs that are just going up across the board. So I think in terms of I think the dashboard is less to kind of come up with the revolutionary idea, if you like. It's more to try to ensure that, you know, the anecdotes that we hear matches what the data is showing, and that we can keep track of these things so that we can try to get to grips with changing scenarios when we do, fingers crossed, go into a period of relatively economic better times. We'll be able to get a much more of a live picture on that. I think on the households, in the household sector, we've had quite a good sort of quite quick insight into that, particularly with the rising energy costs and what was going on there. And that's helped us understand what the scale of the problem and design the various schemes to do that. I think on the business side, because so much business data is released on an annual basis, there's been a gap there that we're trying to fill with this.
Yeah. So thank you. That's really helpful, and I think it exemplifies why the dashboard's going to be helpful. And maybe then it's saying from a policies perspective, we should be thinking more about those sectors that are disproportionately affected at the moment. That's the additional bill. But it is also nice that, as we've said for the last year or so around this table, that vacancies is a problem. It's nice that the data's also backing that up. Sue, you wanted to say something?
Thank you. Yes, I think this is a real step forward, particularly in that sort of real-time reaction to events. The two areas I was going to suggest to be looked at, which reflect, I think, the interests of this committee in particular, and they might be more long-term issues and more long-term data, so, you know, if that's the case, fair enough. But productivity is certainly something we wanted to track and influence over the years. And the second thing is around innovation, and particularly R&D investment. So I think even if those things only change once a year or twice a year, I think this committee needs to have a view on whether they're getting better or not. Thank you.
Good. Thanks. Yes, Peter.
Thanks. I couldn't see Appendix 2, the dashboard, on the report, but it'd be good to see that, just to sort of see visually how they were presented. I wondered if there was something around. We've talked for as long as Henry's been coming to these sort of committees around the importance of innovation connecting to skills, whether at some point we can feed in something around skills. Now that might be more of a medium-term issue, but we know the Chamber are developing the local skills improvement plan, and somehow kind of just factoring that into a kind of an understanding of business health, business performance, business issues. I mean, I appreciate skills are different from vacancies, but I think there might be something about that you might want to connect to. Thanks.
Good. Thanks. Mandy.
Thanks, Andrew. Completely great report. Completely agree with Sue about productivity. I think on innovation, maybe measuring something like KTPs as a lead would be an interesting metric, and combine business with academia. The amount of inward investment we attract, I didn't see if that was in there, but is there something about the number of ongoing tickles we've got, whatever you call them? And then the other thing that we've mentioned, I think, is startups and failures, but shouldn't we be measuring longevity of businesses? So if you have a business, one of the things you measure is the amount of loyalty of your team. So shouldn't we be looking at the profile of our business somehow? If we can keep increasing the length of terms of business and then increasing their sales per employee, then we know that that's a lead metric that will relate back to the household incomes, I'm guessing. And then finally, whenever we use a dashboard in my business, we always want to know immediately we look at it whether it's good or bad and where to concentrate. So reds and greens, you know, what does good look like? What's the definition of, it might not be great, but it's within our boundary of amber. So, but where are the real things we need to focus on? So I don't know, looking at that necessarily, whether that's good or bad. Yeah. I only know the data. So we need to turn that data into information that we can use.
Very good. Yeah, I'd say put arrows on it as well. Is it getting better or getting worse? That's another thing if we're doing the RAG. Yes, Tom?
Yeah, just on that, and apologies with Appendix 2. We'll get that sorted. But in the actual dashboard itself, it will have arrows and a colour scheme, so that it'll be able to help people understand very quickly how it's sort of comparing on a month-to-month basis, is it getting better or worse, and how it's comparing to, say, a pre-pandemic period, if that's what people are interested in as well. And thank you so far for the suggestions on additional data points.
Yes, Asma. And then Farah.
Thank you. Just on the liquidations point, being an insolvency lawyer, where is that data coming from? Are you getting it from the insolvency service?
So it's coming from, so we use a service called FIM, and they track insolvency notices with Companies House. So that's where it comes from.
Okay, so I was just on the point of longevity of the businesses. There are other means of survival of the business even when it enters the process of insolvency. It would be interesting to see those that actually liquidate the death of the company, or those that actually need time to pay arrangements, which mean the company still survives, the employees still retain their jobs, but they're entering into an insolvency process, just to see which sort of sectors are surviving, just need the means to pay. Just out of interest, I think it would be good to see not just the death of the company, but those that actually just need the time under an administration perhaps, or a CVA, which is 4 or 5 year plan, but the business survives, people retain their jobs.
A bit
And
like companies in Chapter 11, is that the sort of thing
Similar.
that you mean? Yeah.
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
So it just breaks it down a little bit more. Liquidation just seems like all of the companies just demise, but actually it's broader than that, and you can survive a business by other means, and it could reflect better in the data that we're looking at as well. The insolvency service or the R3 business recovery, which I'm on the committee of, I can give you the links if you want up-to-date data on what that looks like for our region.
Good, thanks. And nothing about Huddersfield Town Football Club there, which is very good. Farah, you.
That last point about the RAG rating and the tolerances, I think that's really important to see where those parameters are for each of those. So I'd be really interested in that. I think the point that I'm making might be covered under the Chamber's quarterly economic service, but just confidence that businesses have. I think that is really important to sort of know that. It probably is covered with that survey as well, but somehow knowing, whether the businesses are more confident to the last period or less confident, that's really important.
Good, Carl.
A quick one, is there any reason why the Mid Yorkshire Chamber haven't fed into this? It says Western North Yorkshire Chamber.
So the very quick answer is that we support the Western North Yorkshire Chamber with their quarterly survey, and we deal with them when they do their survey. That's it. That's the short answer.
Phil, would you like to sort of respond as well?
I can respond on I want to say something on some of the points that everyone's made. So just directly to Carl's point is one to check, but I think the Western North one might do that survey on behalf of Mid, but we'll check. But I think it's been really interesting to have this has obviously provoked quite a lot of conversation, which is what it's entirely intended to do. I think it's fair to say this is a beta version that we're trying to work on and understand. And one thing to the comments that Peter and Mandy Sewer said in innovation, I agree. I think we need to track and measure that. And Mandy's on inward investment. I think one thing that we're working with Tom on, and you'll see in the next couple of items on item 8, we've used some of our management intelligence from the actual programmes we are supporting when we have much more granular detail on businesses, which is something we can use for businesses we're actually supporting to take the temperature of the regional economy as well. So we want to try and use that information to help inform and advise what we're doing, because data and evidence is everything, and we need as a committee to use that to identify the opportunities we have as a region and tackle those challenges. And then finally, just to add to Asma's point, given that you're really your detailed knowledge on liquidations, business deaths, and insolvency, I think it would be useful having a separate conversation with you to inform us how we interpret that data and how we understand that information as it's going through, because that basic way of looking at business births versus business deaths, we might get more information from that if we're using your experience. So please help us.
Yes, Mandy, last one.
Can I just add one more thing? Have we got a measure on the amount of investment that is coming in from investment houses into our region? So from Northern Gritstone, from Mercia, from any of the big funders, because attracting that to our region is difficult, and it is one of the things that prevents businesses from growing. So I don't know how you get at that data, but I think it would be interesting to see what the funds flow is.
Yeah, thanks, Mandy. So we have a data provider called Bowhurst who provide deal numbers, deal values, who's invested. The caveat is that the smaller end of the market, it's not as good at capturing that because a lot of those deals are private, basically. But yeah, for your standard VC funds and Northern Gritstone, when that's as that makes investments, we'll be able to track these things. In terms of how that interplays with the dashboard, we'll need to be a bit careful about it, just because sometimes in a certain area there might be one deal done, and sometimes you have to be careful whether that company wants to be able to be identified, if you like, from a dashboard. But in terms of the data, we do have it. We'll just have to be conscious of what timeframes we use, what comparison areas we use as well.
But even not knowing who it is, but knowing that into the region we've attracted this many million, and it's across 10 deals, every month. I would track that, because what we want to do is keep getting those big fish to come to this region and invest, either by moving companies here, by creating supply chains here, or by investing in companies that are already here. Attracting money is got to be the premise of attracting and growing businesses.
Phil?
The Bowhurst data is really interesting and probably shows the scale of the challenge we have on some of this versus London and the South East that we absolutely need to focus on. So it's partially stealing Mitchell's thunder a little bit for the next paper, but some of the Bowhurst data that informed our decision to go for Northern Gritstone showed that Northern University spin-outs only get about just over 2%, so 2p in every pound invested in equity comes to Northern universities, compared with much higher proportions going to the London, Cambridge, Oxford triangle. So tracking that, understanding the baseline. But I agree with Tom on the caveats, but kind of showing that over a period of time I think might be useful and instructive.
Good, thank you. Thanks very much for that, Tom. Good discussion. Let's move on now to the Innovation Finance and Regional Investment Vehicle story. Very, very positive story here. This group have for quite a long time been saying that access to finance, particularly for SMEs and spin-outs and new companies, is a big issue. As we've worked on entrepreneurship, at least a couple of the entrepreneurship strands that are running now have identified this as an issue. So I'm really delighted to see that we're taking some proactive action and getting involved with Northern Gritstone, who must be probably the most appropriate one, I think, from my perspective anyway. But Mitchell, do you want to take us through the paper, and then we'll get some comments?
Yeah, thank you. So, as Andrew said there, this paper talks about Northern Gritstone, but it also talks about our policy thinking on innovation finance, something that we definitely need to look at going forward. So I'm going to focus the first part on the Northern Gritstone element, and then talk about kind of our thinking on this. So Northern Gritstone was an immediate opportunity to invest into their investment company that was founded by the University of Leeds, Manchester and Sheffield. This was their round 2 open call for funding. They were founded in, I think, 2020. So they've done a first round, they're looking at a second round now. It's essentially an evergreen investment fund, and it will support a number of university spin-outs as well as some SMEs to grow in sectors that have real potential. So climate tech, life sciences, manufacturing, AI, software and so forth, areas where we have a lot of strengths and we can capitalise on and kind of help them grow and flourish. In terms of kind of the outputs or kind of outcomes of this, there are a number of benefits from that investment. So we've worked out that an internal rate of return could see possibly £40 million by the year 20, 450 new jobs, and support 30 companies over the next 5 years. 18 of those would be university spin-outs. So in terms of kind of the next steps on the Northern Gritstone elements, the Merrill Combined Authority Board met a couple of weeks ago, and they decided to proceed and invest £1.5 million into Northern Gritstone. There is further sign-off and due diligence kind of being taken through now over the next couple of weeks, but I think it's a really positive story that other Mayoral combined authorities are looking at some of the pension funds, like West Yorkshire Pension Fund, for example. And it's probably also worth recognising that it's something new that we've done, investing in an investment firm. So lots of kind of opportunities to see where we can go going forward. But kind of because of this Northern Gritstone investment, and in the long run, we need to look at what we're doing around innovation finance and the role the CA can play in the years to come around supporting high potential SMEs, startups or spin-outs. This kind of links to one of the priorities in the innovation framework that I know you're all familiar with as one of our regional policies, and it kind of supports the government's wider focus on this global science superpower ambition for the UK. So there's two kind of other elements to this paper. The first is exploring what we do as a combined authority on our own programmes, perhaps around angel investment, looking at what other combined authorities are doing in this space, or whether we look further investing in firms like Northern Gritstone and kind of getting more of that BC funding up to the north, because as Phil says, and you'll see on the first page, we've got quite a lot of figures that show a lot of it's centred down in London and the southeast, very disproportionately. I think linked to this as well, there is also looking at not just getting more of these types of programmes in place, but also who we support with that. And you'll hear more about this in the next couple of items, but opportunities around focusing on inclusive innovation, so providing support to female or ethnic minority entrepreneurs with seed financing, for instance. And then secondly, again, linking with the Northern Gritstone kind of theme, if we were to do this going forward, whether it's appropriate for the combined authority to look at a series of investment principles. So essentially investing in companies that align with our values and vision more, looking at sort of EDI, net zero, so forth, strategic priorities and sectors. So that's all I really wanted to say. I think essentially I'd welcome thoughts and comments from the committee. I'm happy to take convos offline as well. But in the early stages of this kind of thinking, so input would be welcome. Pass back over.
Good, thank you very much, Mitchell. Does anybody have a... Yes, Alan.
Yeah, I think it's a really positive setup, this. I think it's really good. What would be nice to see is the results of the investment over time. What's that driving? New investments, or perhaps just numbers of new investments, and particularly for our region here, not just across the north. So how successful are we being?
Good, thanks. Sue?
Thank you. Yes, I just got a question in relation to the investment principles and the diversity element. It's really good to see the fund is signed up to the Investing in Women Code to try and rebalance that. So my question is in relation to how the fund will also ensure the spread of investments across the universities that are not part of the Northern Gritstone Consortium or the partnership, in a similar way to the North-South factor, and are there measures in place here to ensure that, from my point of view, universities like Huddersfield and other ones that are not part of this will also have some proactive involvement? And also, second question was in terms of just to check the profits from the investments, do they get recycled back into the fund? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so they get recycled back into the fund. I think on your first question, I'm not sure if my colleagues know anything about this.
Phil's got something on that, I think.
Phil.
So if you're talking about the Northern Gritstone Fund specifically, so we're buying an equity stake. So we're proposing we take an equity stake, so that will be recycled. And the whole idea is it's recycled and then reinvested, but they will pay a dividend to shareholders, which we will be one of. But the idea is that would also fund support for those businesses. In terms of the regional reach, it has been set up as it began in its infancy as a thing that was set up by 3 of the Russell Group universities in the north of England, those being the University of Leeds, University of Sheffield and University of Manchester. But we have had lots of conversations with Northern Gritstone about ensuring that it has a reach beyond those universities, and for us that means the universities in West Yorkshire, including the University of Huddersfield, and we have seen the pipeline, which is clearly commercially confidential, but we see their businesses across the region including in Huddersfield, Halifax, Bradford, Wakefield, and not just Leeds. But I think this is a conversation we need to keep an eye on and continue with. So we'll be looking to work with you and the other universities. And I can see Sarah's got a hand up. Who probably wants to add to my point.
Yes, thank you. And just say it's not just universities, although that is predominantly the focus. It is going to be businesses that aren't spin-outs and aren't attached to a university as well, which is really positive. Yeah.
Very good, Peter.
Yeah, I think this is a positive development. This is exactly what gain share, in my view, should be used for, to leverage extra investment. So I think it's very, very positive and would support it with the caveats around making sure that it's, our great universities like Huddersfield and others have got that opportunity. I just had a question. I think it was probably just a comment around, in time, making sure that the investment coming through Gritstone aligns to regional provision of grow-on space. So we just make sure that as we're incubating businesses, that we've got that suitable business accommodation here in the region. So I think that's going to be a critical thing. We want to see spin out, we want to see scale ups, we want to retain those businesses. So can we just make sure it's, and I'm sure we will, joined up. Thanks.
Thank you, Peter. I'd really echo that last point. I noticed in some of the economic data that some of the fastest growing in the region is happening around Wakefield, and I'd be reasonably sure that's because there's land and opportunity to put new business in there.
Yeah.
And and it really has to be very high priority for us all, doesn't it, to make sure that we maximise what we can do on that. And our geography is challenging. We've got a lot of hills, haven't we? But within that constraint, we do need to work on it, basically. Okay. Sorry, Asma, didn't see you.
Not really a question, just a comment really. The Creme report looked at the access to funding at Roots and angel investment, and how it was important that the investors kind of looked like the companies and the businesses that wanted the funding. I'm presuming this is a lead into trying to look like they can accommodate the kind of businesses that are going to want to or relate to the funding that is accessible. So it's really more of a comment around, given this picks up quite nicely what the Creme report highlighted, that the difficulties around access to funding for ethnic minority businesses and gender specific businesses that are struggling is because these investors don't look like the businesses that are reaching out for help. So I presume there's a focus element around that to see that we can measure that has changed or will be changing.
Sarah, do you want to say something on that?
Yeah, we will be looking at that and keeping an eye on it. But as part of the bigger picture that Mitchell was talking around, that investment strategy linking to the EDI paper that Josh is about to talk about, definitely going to be a refocus around that as well. Keep an eye on what's existing and then look into how we do more in this space. Yeah.
Good, thanks. Mandy.
Thanks. I think this is really welcome. One of the other things that stops businesses from growing apart from funding is demand. So is there something that we can add to our portfolio in West Yorkshire where we attract, because we're full of SMEs and startups and spin-outs, where we attract OEMs to the region and create supply chain conversations with businesses that exist here? Because one thing is, if you have money, if you don't spend it very well, it's not effective. If we can create the demand at the same time, then we get the double whammy. And I think that's something that isn't done very well. It's done by trade bodies, but do regions do that? And is that something we could start to think about?
Phil?
Some really, really good comments on this paper, both on diversity and also that the money alone is not the answer with the follow-on space and the link to supply chain. It's certainly something we need to think about, Mandy, and OEMs in our region is obviously been a kind of constant challenge compared to other regions, but also we have a diversity of sectors as well, so there's something we need to think about. So it's a really good point.
Okay, Mitchell, could we just say something a little bit about the SME investment fund, because I think that's kind of in this space as well, isn't it? And or is it Phil to speak maybe? Just to make members aware of what's gone on there, because that's kind of a similar thing that's already running, but alongside this new Northern Gritstone thing.
Yeah, I'll attempt to say some high-level things, and Sarah can correct me if I'm either wrong or there's something to add, or Henry. As veterans of this committee will know, that we developed for some time with my predecessor Brian Archer on what was known as the Business Accelerator Fund, which ended up being commissioned to a business called Foresight. So it's the SME investment fund run by Foresight. That was launched in the autumn. They give regular reporting on what they have been investing in. We happily take the committee through some of those investments coming up, but it's worth knowing that it's £20 million fund. It's kind of in its early years, so it hasn't invested in many businesses yet, but we know of many businesses across the patch they're interested in and interested in looking at. And there's some learnings from that, and on some of the questions that we've made, particularly kind of on Asma's points actually, and things we're wanting to expand and develop on in the future approach as well. Taking Peter's point that this is somewhere where we probably need to be moving our activity towards, both in terms of its lead into business growth, but also we're putting some of our skin in the game in the region's businesses as well, so showing our commitment there. I don't know if, Sarah, you want to add to anything I've said there?
I was just going to say, if we bring a fuller paper to the next committee and have a detailed discussion about impact today and plans for the future, that might be useful.
Very good, thanks. And the ancient history that neither of you said is that itself is recycled money. So, this is an example of, hopefully we can just build on the wheel and accelerate it and pick up pace as we go on, tossing some new money in and hoping that it makes some more money so that we can do even more of it. It's a very positive story. So, Mitchell, I think you got a resounding positive on the Northern Gritstone. Thank you. Let's go on to the next one, equality, diversity and inclusion in business support. Phil's going to take us through this one, a really exciting area, and I think there'll be a number of people around the table who want to comment on it. It's a part of what we've talked about for a long time, but I feel that the focus on it and the effectiveness that we're getting into it now is much greater. So let's hear some more.
Thank you, Chair. This is a really, really important paper. I think we started talking about elements that are relevant to this paper in terms of the CREM report, ASMA in the last item. I think I'm going to say a few words of introduction and then Josh is going to talk in more detail through the paper, but just to say our diversity is one of our biggest opportunities. When I was at Bradford working with Leeds on the Channel 4 investment in the region, I got a strong sense from Channel 4 that we wouldn't have won that as a region had it not been for our regional diversity. And that was a strong part of their narrative and argument for coming here. We recognise that we are on a journey with this, and there are some areas of success, but lots to do in this area, which is why we're bringing this paper to this committee and wanting to do more work and to understand and to build and to improve on this agenda. It's important that our business community represents the overall demographics of our region, our overall community. We've been measuring data over the last year. We've been showing really strong performance, which is in the paper, in some of our programmes which are targeted at start-up businesses, and particularly the Enterprise West Yorkshire programme. But we recognise there's more to do, particularly on perceptions, particularly on businesses feeling like, from all backgrounds, feeling like that this is support is for them. They can access it. They can see positive role models. They can see that this is a region they can be successful in, and how we communicate. So we're really, really keen to start the debate, to listen, to be challenged, and to progress this agenda. So at that point, I'm going to hand over to Josh, who's going to talk more in detail about what we're proposing here.
Thanks, Phil. Yeah, so I'll first outline the existing evidence on the reach and effectiveness of business support on businesses led by those with protected characteristics, and then I'll speak to the intention to seek endorsement to develop an equality, diversity and inclusion strategy for combined authority business support functions. So public available research and reports like the Time to Change CREM report, the Business Without Barriers report and the Rose Review show us historic and continuing disadvantage for those from underrepresented groups in terms of access to the entire business support ecosystem. So examples of this include the fact that female-led businesses are on average only 44% of the size of male-led businesses due to difficulties with accessing funding and support. 41% of disabled business owners do not engage with any kind of business support service, and ethnic minority business owners are less likely on the whole to seek business support through formal avenues such as banks or local government initiatives. The barriers each group faces with regards to accessing business support are different, and understanding and removing these barriers is obviously key to increasing access and inclusive growth ambitions across the region. It's also important to understand through looking at the data how combined authority business support activity currently supports diverse and underrepresented groups. Monitoring questions are asked of those who access business support through the combined authority, and data has so far been collected from 1,772 businesses and individuals in this space. Some headlines so far, so we're looking at graph 1 on the paper for these two. So 10.65% of West Yorkshire residents are from Asian Pakistani backgrounds, according to the latest census data. 5.32% of those accessing support via the combined authority are from Asian Pakistani backgrounds. Just over 3% of our West Yorkshire residents are from black backgrounds, and 9.59% of those accessing business support through the combined authority are from black backgrounds. And then moving over to graph 2, amongst the West Yorkshire population, 21.15% of residents reporting a long-term disability as impacting on their daily activity, whilst 11.63% of individuals accessing combined authority business support identify as having some form of disability that impacts their daily lives. It is worth noting some stipulations around the data at this point. Obviously, businesses themselves don't have protected characteristics, so we can only gain the information about the person who's directly engaging with us, though these questions are asked of someone of appropriate seniority, usually someone at director level. As Phil alluded to before, diversity and diverse uptake differs amongst programmes. We've had really high uptake amongst diverse groups on programmes like the Enterprise West Yorkshire programme, whereas some of our other programmes, there's still more work to do on that agenda. And ultimately, we know that data can only tell us half the story, so it tells us who is experiencing difficulties with access, but not necessarily why this is the case. We'd like to highlight the fact that there is a number of activities currently being undertaken by the combined authority with regards to increasing reach and access to business support opportunities amongst underrepresented groups. As mentioned before, the Enterprise West Yorkshire programme has shown very positive engagement with specific groups. 60% of the people accessing support through this programme are female, and 36.5% are from an ethnic minority background. So it is worth considering how learnings from programmes like Enterprise West Yorkshire can be taken forward to influence other provision in this area, and how the types of businesses supported through different programmes may influence uptake by different groups as well. The combined authority has also been working closely with NatWest on women in business initiatives and work to support ethnic minority businesses, which included the launch of the Time to Change report in West Yorkshire in February. And following the commissioning of the North Star report last year to examine the level at which the regional black business community engages with business support, the combined authority is keen to undertake further work to examine how recommendations from this report, particularly those recommendations around building relationships with trusted intermediaries, can be implemented into existing and new business support provision as part of a wider EDI business support strategy. And we'd like to note this report has been influential so far in helping the combined authority shape their thinking on this agenda, and the fact that the combined authority is also supporting Lloyds Bank in the setup of a black business engagement group for the region. As alluded to previously, officers are keen to further develop an EDI business support strategy to ensure support is focused on areas and groups that show least engagement at this point. It's proposed that we develop a strategy and action plan to better ensure business support activity meets the needs of specific groups, which may include ethnic groups that are underrepresented in current business support data, such as Asian Pakistani individuals, ethnic groups with sizable opportunity for community engagement to better understand specific barriers faced, such as the black business community, disabled business owners and entrepreneurs, and female entrepreneurs, particularly those struggling to access business finance and growth initiatives. Aspects of the strategy may include, although of course at this point nothing is finalised, identifying co-design opportunities with partners and community-based organisations, understanding and developing adaptations to existing business support programmes, and identifying further opportunities to gather cohesive data to better inform future interventions, and particularly data that considers intersectionality and socio-economic deprivation in relation to protected characteristics. Strategy will be developed in consultation with appropriate external and internal stakeholders, specifically those from underrepresented groups, and will also be developed with performance indicators in mind to be able to readily measure effectiveness. Should endorsement be given, officers intend to bring a developed version of this strategy to the next committee for members to have view of, with potentially a launch kick-off event following the post-election period in summer. And I'd like to pause here to hand back to the chair and invite any comments.
Very good. Thanks very much, Josh. So we're being invited to endorse the idea that we have a policy on this, and also if people have specific ideas about how we can progress the agenda, what things can be done that will actually help with those difficulties that are being identified, then it would be good. Yes, Mandy.
That's a great report, and I completely endorse developing the strategy in this area. I think one of the things we need to think about is not just engagement of those groups, and that's really important, but also about changing the diversity and the total ESG around all of our businesses. So when we're talking about business support, I don't think we should only be directing our attention to groups that don't engage, that are led by those sort of communities or areas that aren't represented. We should be looking at how do we make sure that all of our businesses that we support are doing things in that area to improve their diversity, to improve their environmental credentials, and that should be part of how we tick boxes to allow people to access the funding. We may already do that, but do we do it strongly enough, is my question.
Okay, yes, Josh.
Thank you, Mandy. Yeah, I think that thought leadership is a really big opportunity for us in this space, absolutely. And I'm really keen for anything we develop here to tie in with our inclusive growth ambitions and our inclusive growth commitments as well, to make sure we can maximise thought leadership in that space. Phil, I don't know if you wanted to add anything on that.
It's a good thought about kind of how we might kind of we've already got our fair work. We're developing our fair work charter. I just need to think about whether or not we could consider something along those lines within the fair work charter, which is linked to our procurement.
We have businesses that will pay more for products if it's from a female-led business, for example. So if you want dramatic change, we need to force that change onto businesses. It doesn't have to be that they have to have this much diversity, but they have to have a programme to increase it. It doesn't have to be a yes or no. It can be that you're doing things to change, the ground zero that you're at. And I think that apprenticeship programmes, diversity, employee engagement, all of those things should be part of what we check before we invest in businesses.
Yeah, very good. And certainly in the past, Henry, we've had criteria that are influencing whether grants are given out or not, according to whether some of these criteria are being addressed, aren't they? I think we're probably still doing that, Henry. Is that right? Asma, you wanted to speak?
Just to say that PLCs have a criteria, and it's just accepted that that criteria will be met in terms of diversity, and it's not considered just a tick box. And I do think it's a really positive if we can introduce that across the board, and every business gives that more of a focal point at the point that they're looking at investment, because I think it's going to be the way to go forward in any event. So it would be brilliant to start to implement that.
Okay, good. Sue, were you wanting to speak?
Yeah, just to say, I think there's been a lot of progress in this area, and particularly through members of this group have put a lot of effort into that, Carl especially. The one I think I just wanted to echo is what Phil said about Enterprise West Yorkshire, and the way that has really upped the dial on this, and I think it shows the power of proactive contract policies. So if you ask for a proactive contribution to EDI, it really makes a difference rather than a passive thing. So well done, really, on achieving that.
Carl.
Thanks, Chair. I think those are really good points made about how we try and influence others to think a bit more responsibly about how they can also make important impacts and contributions to a kind of wider agenda that benefits all of us. And I think when you referred to Henry just a minute ago, Chair, I think that's really important, because the source of a lot of the grants and the size of those grants are based on index of local deprivation statistics, of which, unfortunately, as we know, that many of those communities from those protected characteristics are actually based in those communities which have quite high levels of deprivation and index of deprivation, and quite deficit figures in terms of prosperity and well-being more generically. And to be honest, when I'm happy, I look miserable like this. And the chair's right. It's a really, really exciting moment for us as a region of West Yorkshire. And we've had the opportunity before. So prior to Henry being here 11 years, Henry had a former life as part of the Regional Development Agency. Is that not right? And you're trying to pretend you didn't? Right. So, so we've been presented with these opportunities to say, how can we embrace, the wider untapped strengths of the business community that have so far not been reached as effectively as we could have done. And I think it's been summarised very well in terms of reach, engagement and participation through co-design. That it's a simple message as Phil, Sarah, Henry, well, Henry's jumped ship now, but Phil, Sarah and others will be leading on. And the communities, would you honestly, they in terms of the North Star report, the first and foremost response is, thank you, at last we can get involved. Because we can't, it's not a tokenistic thing we're trying to do. The CREM report clearly says there's a business case to embracing and utilising that wider business community that we haven't done so far in GVA. And the communities in our regard, in the targeting the black business community, have been chomping at the bit to get involved, add value, particularly around the cultural and creative industries, which is a space that many of the ethnic minorities businesses operate in. And they have quite high ambitions, and not to mention the conversation about international trade and how we can maximise links to those back home countries that many of these communities have uniquely got access to at a very, very high level. All of those things benefit West Yorkshire. So I think it makes sense, Chair, and I'll just finish by saying, obvious sense for us to have an EDI strategy and an action plan. So thank you, Phil, thank you, the team, and thank you also, Josh and Lorna, who's not here, that we've started to make very positive inroads into monitoring and evaluating, and measuring that level of engagement. And there's a commitment. And one thing that our report did say, it starts with a vision, and this is what really we're saying to this committee is, let's endorse a vision for that engagement to be better. And then in the action plan, let's find ways to resource that in a creative way through sources such as the Shared Prosperity Fund and other funding that can play a role. So I'd just like to, echo what people have said so far, Chair.
Very, very good, thank you. And thanks for the input. I mean, the North Star report has obviously been very influential and is informing quite a lot of what we're saying here, haven't we? So, thank you for spearheading that for us. I'll just speak up a bit for Amir, who's sadly not with us today, but and maybe Asma, this is something that you could comment on. But Amir has often said, as we've been forming ideas in this area, that the business advice community is possibly one of the opportunities here, because many of the minority businesses do interact daily with people like accountants, lawyers, and other kinds of advice, and that may be a way in that is seen as a little bit more easy to approach than the combined authority, which perhaps might seem a bit monolithic to some people. Asma?
Absolutely, Chair. I think that's one of the conversations we've sort of had. It's getting that inroad. Your accountant is pretty much the first point of contact. Lawyers come way down the line. It's your accountant, and I'm married to one, so I know the type of phone calls he gets on a daily basis. I do think there's an opportunity there if we seek something about educating our accountants around what positive growth looks like in terms of the opportunities that could filter through to the right businesses. I also think maybe there is a link between the council as well, because those that apply for planning permission, and this is coming up time and time again through conversations I'm having with my husband, that there seems to be a disconnect slightly, because those businesses that have got outside investment that are looking for space in or around Leeds, they're not also looking for growth, areas of growth. They're just getting a knockback, and there is perhaps an opportunity to connect the two, to say, look, we could grow this business with the kind of space you're looking, which is, you know, high-end Leeds Central, with the business growth development team stepping in at the same time. So I just wonder, the accountants probably can help us in more ways than one, because they're usually the point of call in all of those avenues that could actually bring it back to the business growth element, and our teams can step in terms of providing the information that the accountant needs. I don't know how we filter that through to the accountants, but I think between us, if the North Star report, obviously, you will have spoken to a number of accountants.
Our data show that the accountants are the first go-to
They're the point of
point
call.
for businesses.
So I think between us, if we could put together details of where we believe are the main sort of accountants in our region, it's quite easily done. They would be happy to engage, I think, and West North Yorkshire Chamber also probably have a fair amount of detail around that, where we could probably start a little database of where we should be focusing.
Very good. Yeah, I mean, I fully endorse, and I think Amir would say planning consultants and architects may be another place as well, but I'm hearing that accountancy is the absolute sort of basis of this. Why don't we convene a meeting, bring them in? You know, it doesn't, you know, just get a selection of accountants in and give them the pitch about what we're trying to do.
I think that would be great. I'd be happy to host.
You know, they could be great advocates for what the CA is doing in general, couldn't they, in terms of the business support and you know, what we, you know, making sure they understand what the offers are, and that, you know, they can be extensions of the business growth.
You can actually ask them to invite some of their businesses that they think could benefit from that, so they actually come with people that we should be speaking to.
Perfect. Very good. Okay, that's very positive. Yes, Jane.
Thank you. I just wanted to strongly endorse the paper, and actually within the paper, within the action plan, which we need to start just getting on and doing, there is a reference, there's a word used of navigators, basically, as well as our business growth advisors. Within the paper it talks about navigators, and navigators and ambassadors are exactly what we're talking about. So let's just do it.
Well said. Absolutely. Yeah. Anybody else wanting to give input on that? Yes, Phil?
Well, just to thank everybody for the comments, and we've worked with many of you on this already, so it's good that you endorse the direction of travel. Just to pick up on a couple of points that Carl and Asma made. Carl, on the international investment and inward investment side, we've got the next items on that, but thinking about our communities and how we work with them when we're trying to market the region to other countries where those communities are I think is something we need to do more of. So that's something we should register. And we have a professional services network, but I agree, using that plus doing some bespoke events with it, because that tends to be the larger end of the professional services sector, but doing stuff with wider accountancy, legal, property companies. It's about getting our message out. This is partly around communication. And so we're really, really keen to work with the committee on that. And then finally, I think it began by Mandy's point, but others said it too. This is on us, not just the CA. So us is all of us as business community. We've all got to make a contribution to this. So we've talked about some of the things we do together, but I think we have a shared mission here. So let's work on that.
Thanks, Phil. Absolutely right. That's kind of why we're here anyway, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. Well, let's move on to the next one then. Business support principles for West Yorkshire, and I think Louise, is that going to be you who talks us through this? So it's good to continually review what we're doing in this area. It's the guts of what we're actually doing. So that's great that we're on it. So we're looking for the committee to give some feedback on what's going on, and there's a specific question about what kind of businesses we're targeting to help out particularly. So I don't think there's any suggestion that anybody's barred, but there is a question about where do we put our most energy in and who would most benefit from the sorts of interventions that we're making. So over to you, Louise.
Thank you. So as you know, we've got a number of new business support services starting in April. Currently, our services are funded by ERDF under European funding, and that comes with a lot of restrictions. So, for example, most of this support is only available to B2B businesses, and B2Cs aren't able to access a lot of the support. The paper outlines some of the reasons that that's the case, and for example, displacement in very local areas. But under the new single investment fund, the new funding that the new programmes will be delivered under, there is more flexibility, but we have less money. So we want to ensure that we're making the most impact, like you say, Andrew, through targeting the support to businesses who are, like I said, going to make the most impact. So I want you to open it up to the committee for input, please.
Okay, thank you. And I would call people's attention to particularly page 54, which talks about the programmes that we're actually talking about. Just also a little bit of a point on 2.17. It should say B2C, not B2B, shouldn't it? So and then it makes sense, doesn't it? So this is potentially quite momentous, actually, saying that we will open it up to business to consumer type businesses, which means shops, high street, internet sellers, all those kind of things. And the reason that it hasn't been done in the past, if people haven't had it explained to them what displacement means, is that it's been something that we haven't done before, because the assumption was if you help one business, it's going to be at the expense of another who doesn't get that business within a local environment, and therefore let's not touch it. That was the thinking. And there's something in that, isn't there? And I guess we would all be able to, think of the kind of business that might be involved in that hyper-local kind of grocery business, for example. If something's being sold here, it's not being sold there, and that's a problem. But I think there's lots of other businesses, though, where that won't apply, and particularly if we take retail, for example, the competition isn't really other retail now, it's the internet, isn't it? And it's what's happening on the high street, and what kind of places are we trying to get people to come into, and what kind of places do we want to actually live in, and what do people want to do in our common spaces. And it would seem to me to be sensible that we should at least be able to consider those kind of businesses while having the criteria in mind as, is this really displacement, and could we potentially be criticised for having helped one and not to the disbenefit of somebody else. So that's what we're talking about. It's been mentioned in the past 2 meetings that we're potentially going to make that change. I don't feel that we've really had a very clear steer from the members yet, except that I'm saying I think it's a good idea, but I'm just looking around the table and making eye contact with you really and saying, are you sure you want to say that? Because it is quite a big change. Yes, go ahead.
That would sort of change the landscape of the support that we give to businesses out there, wouldn't it? And if the finance is already being reduced, will there be enough to go around? That would be my question. We're already getting less. We're kind of extending the scope of what we're going to give it to. The net result of, SMEs will be
So would you have any steer for the officials about what kind of criteria they should be thinking about as they think whether it's B2B or B2C? Do you have any feeling on that?
I think some way of connecting it to the manufacturing, if there's a sort of back-end connection to some businesses, I'm not quite sure what that would look like right now, but if there was some sort of relationship with other sort of manufacturing business or with other supply chain further down further back, I think that would work.
Yeah.
If that was locally based.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Peter?
I just wondered about the relationship with the UK subsidy control regime. So basically the change to subsidies coming in, which came in January from EU to UK. Is that something we need to think about, be mindful of? Does that give us that flexibility? Just a question.
Yes, Henry, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, so that doesn't. It's a good point. We are across that. It's probably a more flexible framework than we had under the EU. There aren't any sector restrictions. There is a funding cap, which is more generous than the previous de minimis cap was in terms of any financial support for businesses. But we still do need to be mindful of it. And we need to capture the amount of state support that an individual business gets over a 3-year period. But it's gone up to sort of 300 grand rather than the 180,000 euros which it was under EU.
Yeah, so in our context, that's not going to affect that many grants, but it was good question, and we do need to be across it. So Sue and then Mandy.
Thank you. Yes, I think this flexibility is welcome in the context of B2B and B2C being a crude stick to distinguish between. So I think doing away with that is a good thing. particularly with what you said, Chair, about the shift to e-commerce. And I know from the work we do with the Kirklees Top 100, there's some big businesses in there that are B2C, like PC Specialist, who employ hundreds of people and have huge numbers of exports. So to me, the important factors here are they exporting or potential to, are they innovating, the growth dimensions. So I appreciate, that's more work in the sifting stage, but those are the things that make a difference in terms of growth.
Good. Okay, thanks.
I guess my question is looking at the appendix. Is we're sorting on input rather than output mostly. So we're saying the size of the business, 2 to 100, or B2B as Sue's saying, rather than B2C. Maybe we should. Why do we put them into baskets? Why don't we just say what the transformation is going to be? And on grant funding, is there any reason why we can't have some grant funding paid back? So if you've got productivity improvements, you might need £50,000 to get it going, but the productivity improvement means that business is going to be making more profit. So can't it be paying that back over the next 5 years?
Interesting point. Does anybody want to come back on that one?
Sorry if I'm being a bit radical.
I don't know if colleagues want to comment on that one.
I mean, I think that he's really interested in that grant loan mix has been looked at, that kind of model of, it's effectively, let's say it's £10,000, but really it's a £5,000 grant and a £5,000 loan, and we can agree some metrics so that money comes back once you hit that. I guess the challenge is just the actual resource of managing a scheme of that nature, and to what extent do we really want to claw money back? You want to put it in those crude terms off businesses if they don't achieve it. It might be that we'd stage the payments more than sort of give the money out and then try to get it back.
If you're going for increased productivity and you're not prepared to put your own skin in the game and pay it back, then why are you bothering to invest in it in the first place? To me, I'd be very happy if you gave me £50,000 and I didn't have to pay it back. But if I have to pay it back, then there's a much more incentive on me in delivering the productivity improvement that I've committed to. Yeah. It's patient capital that's the issue, not necessarily the grant funding. I mean, a lot of these businesses are privately owned. My business is privately owned. And, I don't see there's any reason why you can't pay that back. Please don't ask for any grants that we have had paid back at the moment. But if that's part of the deal, if it's over a period of time, then there's no reason why you shouldn't pay that back. Yeah. Nobody ever comes to check that you've created the jobs, really, that you over a period of time that you said you would. I think looking at the outputs about export, diversity, employing young people, all of those things should be the outputs, and obviously productivity improvement, and then, we claw it back. Anyway, that's just my view of the world.
Thanks, Henry, for stepping in at the start of that. But so just... We have to kind of think carefully about this, which is why we're bringing this for discussion rather than to finalise it. And it's really, really, really good to have this input in terms of kind of how we might design support and investment. It links to actually the point that Andrew mentioned at the start when he alluded to the investment strategy and the things that when we're assuring what we're investing public money in, we're thinking about those priorities. And you mentioned what some of those might be, Mandy, but also the market failure as well. So are we investing to address a market failure, i.e. that the finance can be found elsewhere as well as, or are we investing to kind of put skin in the game, share and growth? And these are all kind of complicated issues that we need to really fully understand and bottom out, which is why I think we need to continue this discussion probably in more depth, potentially in a private session as well, to get more of a detailed conversation where we can bring some real examples that we might want to do in a public committee to kind of bottom out how we develop this and do the right thing, and then we can inform our investment strategy. I think there'll always be, to Sue's point, the movement away from kind of business to business, just business to business to consumer, takes away kind of that arbitrary boundary, but we need to think carefully about kind of what the scenarios to kind of test the tolerance of that, about where it works. And there are all sorts of reasons, and kind of inclusivity as well, and making sure we invest in businesses in a wider amount of communities, geographically and kind of demographically, is also something we need to consider too.
So So are you thinking we might workshop that sort of thing?
I think I'm suggesting exactly that, Chair. Yes. Yeah.
Can I suggest also with like an options appraisal, which I think you're leaning towards there as well, considering the different factors.
Okay, Jane.
Thank you. Phil said a great deal of what I wanted to say. The business-to-business model in terms of investing in manufacture has been a real strength, really, of the combined authority. But I actually think we've learned quite a lot, really, over the period that we've been having those investments, really. And I think some worked examples, a sort of history of some of the investments, what worked well and what was difficult, I think would be very useful in a workshop environment. I think moving to consumer support is actually, I think, is the way to go. But I would like to see it to being quite nuanced, really, in the way that Phil was describing, really. We've got to, we're entering this new territory. It does have to be a bit more nuanced. I think there has to be some spatial element to it in terms of where manufacturing is underrepresented, or town centre growth, or particular deprivation, or particular lack of access to capital in those areas. So I would expect to see a spatial dimension and to be more nuanced in terms of the West Yorkshire environment in different parts. But I think it is the right way to go.
Good, thank you. Is there somebody down here? Yes, Alan, please.
Yeah, I was interested reading through why it's limited to SMEs only, given some of the larger businesses in the area can drive growth throughout the whole of the supply chain that's feeding into them. Wondering whether there's a reason that it's SME only.
Does somebody want to take that on? Henry, do you want to say something about that? Or?
I think typically it's because ERDF funding and the restrictions around ERDF funding businesses, and because we've assessed that those SMEs, particularly the smaller end of SMEs, are most in need of kind of support. But it is a valid question that is part of this discussion about the extent to which it's SME or micro versus larger businesses.
It's just quite an arbitrary number, 250 employees. If you're 300, you're out of it. But probably still need it.
Well, it's 500 now for SMEs anyway, so that's already changed. And I think I'm right in saying, although we might say we've got an emphasis on the medium small, it doesn't preclude helping a business. Is that right?
We can say that, absolutely. Yeah.
Wait, I think keeping it as open as possible while saying what our bias might be is probably the right way to go. Anybody else got any comments on this? Yes, Richard.
I'd just like to understand a little bit about the flexibility of the approach. So, for example, you're sort of setting your agenda now, but the landscape's changing quite a lot. I think there's a lot of other funding streams coming through, or hopefully so. We were at the Health Tech Cluster meeting recently, and there's some great potential funding coming into the region, as well as the new enterprise zone or tax incentives. So, is there options to pivot with us having more flexibility now in terms of reviewing it on an ongoing basis and seeing where the actual need is? Because me, again, being in health tech, there looks like there's some great opportunities, maybe not this year, but next year. So that flexibility, I think, would be really important, as opposed to sort of being too focused and stringent.
Good, thank you. Yes, Carl?
Richard, just a very quick one. It might seem an obvious one, but just as an example, and it was expressed earlier about in the last paper about barriers to accessing business support. Well, this is exactly something that lifts one of those key barriers, and I think Sue, for all the very valid points you made in terms of people paying back over a period, but it's because a lot of the protected characteristics groups, including the ethnic minority business community, are focused in the service sector and less so in the other manufacturing and other sectors, and so structural changes like this make a macro effect on those communities and those businesses.
Good, thank you. Yes, Henry.
Yeah, just building on that point. If we look at the one of the current grant schemes, which is the emergency energy grants, actually BT, which was open to all sectors, B2C has been the highest sector that's actually taken that up. So if you do tailor a product to certain sectors, or to include all sectors, and then you can do some specific targeting, you do get the take up, and that Carl's point's definitely true. the challenge we've had with the RDF is, and in terms of engaging with certain demographic groups and the businesses in those groups, is we don't want to raise appetite and then not have any products that those businesses can access. That's probably worse than not engaging at all. So I think this is a great opportunity to align with the EDI priorities and have products that are more universally available. The flip of that is Farah's point, you know, we have got less resource, we cannot support everybody. So I think it really is about what we're going to support businesses with. You know, what are we looking to incentivise businesses to do, and behaviour that we might want to incentivise. You know, we're not just going to start giving grants out to a business just because they're in a certain sector. They need to be doing something that aligns with our priorities, say around environment or around productivity or around employment and skills. So as long as we can get the offers right, then we should be, you know, we should be able to support those sectors. And on Richard's point, continue to bid for specific pots like the health tech stuff as it comes along, because we've got gain share money that's funding the wider service. It's, you know, it's this group that's deciding how we use that money rather than ERDF or the agents for ERDF in the country. So we are in a pretty good position there, I think, in terms of the flex. Thanks.
Very good. Yeah, it's a new world in that. It's very, very good. Any more on that? Yes, Sue.
Sorry, this is just a small point really, but and not with my university hat on. But Henry mentioned about the environmental funding and the energy support, and I know through one of my voluntary commitments that if you're a small voluntary body that you don't employ any staff and you application process, that means that you can't get past first base. So it's not necessarily an EDI kind of issue in this case, but there might just be a kind of do not pass go situation for those kind of smaller organisations. I can probably provide information offline because it might be an easy fix this, but it just occurred to me there that we'll be thinking about that kind of sector as well. If they are broadly eligible, there might be some small barriers there that are stopping them getting through the door.
And you'd suggest that we got rid of the barriers, is what you're saying?
Yes.
Yeah, good. Okay. Thank you very much. Let's go on to the last item of discussion, the inward investment strategy. This is something that the manufacturing task force focused on quite strongly in terms of making this a most attractive place to bring businesses and to be. The manufacturing people involved in that were very, very passionate about it. And it has always been part of what the CA does. Although around this table we haven't given it so much airtime over the last year or two, I would say. So it's very welcome that it's going to come back. Henry, I think in your new guise as a trade person, you're going to speak about this, and I would just comment as you take us through it that ask committee members to think about whether they'd like to have this more regularly discussed. I'll indulge myself as a long-time member of this committee to say we used to spend up to half our time on this. So you know, it's clear to me that we need to do more than we have been doing. But think about perhaps how much is appropriate. Over to you, Henry.
Okay, thank you very much. And I think you're right, Andrew. It has sort of dropped off the agenda a bit, so it's very timely to bring this back. The paper does a couple of things, hopefully. Firstly, just sets out where we are in terms of key achievements on trade and investment in this financial year, which we're obviously just about to end, and then also makes the case for a new strategic approach to inward investment on the second half of the paper. So hopefully members have had a chance to have a look through. I think the first point I'd make just at 2.4 in the table, it is typical for inward investment wins to sort of land in the final month of the year when we're all sort of scrabbling around and chasing up businesses and chasing up intermediaries and stakeholders. So although you know, we're only 18 there on the key metric really, which is the 30 wins for the region, we've got plenty in the pipeline that have been converted since this report was written, and a few more that hopefully will convert in the next few days. But we'll update, or somebody will update, not me, at the next meeting in terms of where we're at with that. You can see the successes then that we've had in terms of inward investments landing in the region. These are a mix of new investors coming into the region and businesses that are already here, but with overseas parents. I won't go through those. I think a couple just to pick out. The EMI one's really interesting. It's quite small in size and value for now, but it's quite significant in terms of what that means for our region and the fact that they chose this side of the Pennines, and it's the first sort of major label to open up a site in the north or outside of London. So that's a really significant one. I'd also like to mention PEXA. It's actually Simon Wright involved in this, who is a member of the panel, formerly of Yorkshire Bank, now is the chief exec of PEXA UK. But this is a really exciting investment for the region, and will create a number of jobs very much in that kind of fintech space. At 2.9, we talk about the work we've been doing in India in particular, which has been really successful this year, led by our trade team, Jenny Holdstock and Amanda Potter. And the Mayor went out on a visit with those earlier in back end of last year, and it was a really successful visit, and the Mayor got a lot out of it, and we were able, while we were over there, to meet with Emphasis. We were a large Indian-owned financial services company, and they were able to confirm a major expansion in the region, which was fantastic. Only problem now is that the Mayor expects that every time she goes overseas, she wants to come back with a 1,000-job announcement, which is obviously not always going to be the case. So we just need to manage expectations a little bit there. And then also just probably to reference the at 2.12 Arab Health. Again, we went out and the Mayor joined the mission with several businesses. I think were you involved in that, Richard, as well? This year? Yeah. So several SMEs to really showcase our strength in medtech. And that's a really significant international event for the sector. And we made some really good contacts with potential significant inward investment leads. Hopefully one or two in the OEM category, which we are account managing now and trying to convert. So we'll keep you posted on that as well. I'll probably just pause, Andrew, at that point, because that's probably. Oh, actually, sorry, I'll just say at 2.19. Just to reaffirm, set out there the work we've been doing around the space sector. This is just not just the trade and investment team, may I hasten to add. This is work across the CA teams, with colleagues in policy and colleagues in business support. It's been really successful, and just setting out there the fact that it's a really exciting year for the sector in this region this year, with two major events coming up. The funding that we've managed to secure with the university for Space Hub Yorkshire, and a big thank you again to Mandy for private sector leadership on this. So I was going to just pause at that point to ask if there's any questions or comments on that first part of the report, Andrew, before I move on to the second bit about the strategy.
Anybody have any questions about what is being achieved? It's impressive, isn't it? Do you want to say anything more about the space bit, Mandy? I was kind of expecting you might want to say something along those lines, yeah?
It's been fantastic. A fantastic piece of work, I think, that a whole group of people have been involved in. And thank you to Peter, who sat next to me, help for the Yorkshire University input. It's been wonderful. We've had an event at Huddersfield, we've had events all over the Yorkshire patch, not just West Yorkshire. But it's a really exciting technology. It's not about rockets and astronauts, it's about data. We need to make sure that space technology underpins everything. I don't know if you've listened to all the conversations about AI at the moment, but that all falls within space technology. So the more we can bring this to the businesses in the region and think about the startups and spin-outs in the region, then I think there's an opportunity for us to really lead on this.
Good, thanks. And Carl was making remarks about how some of our minority communities have got excellent opportunities to bring to bear here, and I know that that's something that we do already, but I'm sure we can do more. Yes, Sue?
Just to reinforce the value of the work, the India trip and some of those other ones, I know the university has got a really good link from the India mission to a big health group in terms of university links. nursing links, that kind of thing. So it's really good that the team are back out there really quickly attending these events. You know, not waiting to post pandemic to get back out there. It's really positive.
Thanks.
I'll just add something. I wonder do we use our university alumni, or could we use them better? So there's lots of alumni that we've used in the space work that we've done from the universities to try and create connections. And I think we've got some fantastic universities, and if we trawl those alumni, we might be able to find more support for things that we're trying to achieve. And then the second thing is, when we're talking about inward investment, can we add supply chain events to that inward investment piece? Because we're SME strong. We talk about bringing companies here, and we talk about trade, but we don't talk necessarily about bringing primes here to shore up our SMEs, and I think that's something we could do more of.
Good, thank you. Yeah, and the narrative here is terrific, isn't it? I mean, this is the most upbeat, in a way, the most upbeat input that we're having this afternoon, isn't it? You know, all these businesses choosing to come here, exciting new areas, and you know, I think aside from the actual brass tacks of the business that's generated by doing it as well, it's a good feel-good factor for the region, and something that, you know, really supports the work that we're trying to do around the table of making people feel energised about West Yorkshire and what we're doing here. So back to you, Henry.
Okay, thank you very much. So yeah, we've already got a trade strategy which was adopted by the CA last year and had been to this committee for comment on a couple of occasions and input and to inform that strategy. But we've not actually had something on the investment side, inward investment side, for quite a while. So if somebody was to ask the question why, in terms of inward investment, are we targeting advanced manufacturing or health and life sciences, for example, I think most people around this table could give a good answer as to why, but there isn't an actual up-to-date body of evidence with policy drivers in a post-Brexit, post-COVID world, you know, more fragmented world in terms of geopolitics. That we could point to and say, yeah, well, this is why these are target sectors and target markets for inward investment. So we have got India and we have got things like Arab Health, which we've been doing, but we need to set them really within more of a strategic framework that's a bit more future-looking than sort of past and present. So that's the context for this. And at 2.25, we set out some of the things that we think this strategy would need to address, and hopefully some of those things have been discussed. I think some of those things have been discussed already today in terms of you know, what will our target sectors and subsectors be. You know, things have changed. We've got emerging strengths in sectors and subsectors like space that we've just mentioned, and things linked to supply chains are on the green agenda, for example. We also need to, I think, reassess or look at the evidence around what some of the interventions would be in terms of inward investment, and what's the best use of what will still be limited funding, but how do we use it most effectively? You know, and do we need to strengthen things like university alumni that's been mentioned, working with supply chains to try to influence up the supply chain potentially, key account management versus key account management and investor development versus trying to land new FDI. What should the balance of resource be? Where are we best? You know, what's the best sort of fertile hunting ground for that? So far, over 60% of our inward investment successes have come from foreign-owned businesses with a presence in the region, and working with them when there's reinvestment opportunities down the line. And that also helps to win ongoing investment if we can build a relationship with the decision makers here, working on those businesses. So that's something else that we wanted to have as a factor. Two really important points at 6 and 7 again have been mentioned today, but where you know, what levers can we have to attract particularly OEMs or larger inward investors into the region where we will be competing with other regions in the UK? Be part of that alongside all the other things we can do to help with planning and recruitment and skills and travel, etc. So that's an important factor, and particularly looking at what our competitor regions might have It's quite a secretive area, but we do hear about areas which can attract investors into a certain area. And then the use of, we mentioned it, the use of the diaspora communities. I think we've done that well in India and Southeast Asia, but there are other parts of the world, as Carl's mentioned there, where we've got very strong connections, and we should be looking to exploit. The rest of the paper just sort of sets out a timeline for how we might go about doing this work. But I think what we're looking for from the committee today, please, is any views on areas that should be addressed within this piece of work that are not currently listed within the report, and any other comments for what we should be looking to do on the inward investment front to complement the trade strategy. Thank you.
Asma and then Eric.
The UAE in the Middle East is a growing area of inward investment. It's heavily dominated around London, and I think our region hasn't really benefited from those connections, and the connections that are being built are more individual businesses that have sort of looked at the halal expo, Sharia financing kind of, and they're making some inroads on that. I've got a few connections, but they're more individual businesses. It may be an opportunity for inward investment for our region if we looked. It's always concentrated around India and Asian. I think there's an opportunity in the Middle East. They are keen to invest, but I don't think they see our region outside of London as an opportunity. And maybe there's something we can explore around there. If I can perhaps give you the contact that I know she's currently out there in Riyadh. I've just come back from Saudi, and she's linking up with sort of the Emirati businesses out there. So there must be an interest, and she's from the north. I think there's opportunities, and I just don't think we've focused as much because we let London kind of take over in that degree when it comes to the Middle East, because that's where everybody likes to visit from the Middle East anyway.
Phil, did you want to comment on that now?
We should follow that conversation up, Asma.
Good. Eric.
Thank you, Chair. It's been very interesting, this conversation today. But I'd like to just dig a bit deeper. We've been really successful, as being described, about attracting inward investment. And I'd like to know a little bit more about the geography of where it's going, this inward investment. Is it centred in Leeds and then a ripple effect, or is Leeds getting the lion's share and the rest of West Yorkshire getting very little?
Henry, do you want to take that?
I think in terms of new FDI coming into the region, the majority is going to Leeds. But if we look at, but it's split. I mean, there's investments going into the other parts of West Yorkshire, but I'd say the majority is going into Leeds. And a lot of that is going into places like Nexus, where there is a soft landing presence for an inward investor. But where, as I mentioned, because on investor development, that's where most inward investment comes from, where we've got existing foreign-owned businesses across West Yorkshire reinvesting. That's very much split across the 5 districts, because we do have we have a good spread of foreign-owned businesses right across the district. So if we look at the report, UK Greetings, for example, is based in Kirklees district, and Allied Glass is in the Wakefield district. So we have, it's much more spread when it's existing foreign-owned businesses who we support. But when it's new businesses, I think we've got a challenge on our hands to get them beyond Leeds, because often they've heard of Leeds and they want to be in Leeds city centre, and that might be the right location for them. But we also, I think, need to do a bit more to get on their radar that there are other parts and other attractive investment locations outside of Leeds within West Yorkshire.
Phil?
Yes, we certainly need to do better for the rest of West Yorkshire.
Councillor Firth, it is an excellent point. So I think one of the reasons why this hasn't been to this committee, this report and this information, for a number of years, and we've put this on the agenda so we can have this debate and we can have and we can bring and we can talk about the statistics. I think there's two kind of plain speaking points I make. One of which is if you look at our competitor regions, so if you look at Greater Manchester, a lot of the investment will be in Manchester because it's the core city and the city centre, but we do need to challenge ourselves. I would say in Wakefield specifically, there is a lot of opportunity, and you have an excellent inward investment team within Wakefield Council that we're working with on things like CoStar, working with things like Talyard, and working on the wide, and there are a number of investors that are in big businesses that are interested in sites around Ferrybridge, Castleford. So we want to work with all our local authorities, and I think one of the ways in which we can do that more is to bring papers like this to the committee so we can discuss the statistics and challenge ourselves as we go forward. So really, really helpful comments. Thank you.
Of course.
Thank you, Chair. Connectivity is one of the major keys to this. And you will all be aware that TRU upgrade, £3 billion is going to be spent in Kirklees, within the Kirklees boundaries. Lots of opportunities there, and let's hope we can actually link that upgrade, the opportunities that brings, with West Yorkshire and the jobs it brings and the opportunities it will bring.
And apologies, you're Kirklees, and we do work with the inward investment team there as well, and the points, and Andrew Sharp, and the points are recognised around connectivity, and we work very closely with transport.
Good. Yes, Sue, and then Richard.
Thank you. Yes, I think it's a really good idea to be refreshing and redoing this strategy at this moment in time. So a couple of points. Yes, I think the alumni and the reach of the universities into the international student arena is definitely an asset that we should be exploiting more. So, welcome Andy's suggestion around that, and we'll all have contacts in the different institutions that can get involved in workshops and that kind of thing. I think the second thing that it would probably be timely to link to this strategy is the opportunity that you mentioned at the start, Andrew, which was about the investment zones and the opportunity that will give us to really put in extra incentives to attract companies. Within Kirklees, I'm particularly thinking about the station to stadium corridor and the health innovation campus opportunities that can really be a magnet. And I think one of the opportunities in relation to that point about the Leeds effect, if you like, is to have extra incentives to target within the place-based dimension of this, so that you've got both and opportunities depending on what the company's motivations and interests are. So we could do both.
Good. Yes, Richard.
I was just going to say really what Sue said about the investment zone. It's a clear opportunity to develop part of the FDI strategy around that. I think it's excellent, and again allows us really to focus on that place and take some of it out of Leeds city centre and places like Huddersfield, of course. So I think great. And then again, utilising people like the Academic Health Science Network continue to do that. They've shown great results with Nexus, along with Medilink, ABHI, all people in health tech, again apologies, but drawing people into the region and great networks globally.
Yes, Simon. And then please.
Maybe just to make sure that it's bilateral as well. So as well as trying to bring investment in, we're also promoting the SMEs that we've got for investment. We're so heavy with the SMEs, we don't really want to give them an additional drain of FDI comes in and then draws all the resource out that they need to survive, because getting and then training good talent is really difficult to do. So it's important that we maybe kind of push that SME base that we've got internationally and help try and get it the other way maybe as well.
Yeah, good. Peter, yeah.
I think this is a very timely piece of work for a number of reasons. There's been a national study done by universities with UK research and innovation around connecting and incorporating FDI into R&D. And a report that was published earlier this month set out some real actions for government and for mayoral combined authorities and for universities. And one of the things that was demonstrated through that work was universities encouraged to work together in what they call hunting packs to attract that investment. And that's a key issue that certainly when we've met with the mayor, with vice chancellors, that she said, that kind of ecosystem working collaboratively together is incredibly important. You mentioned through space. So we'd be very keen to support this work, and I think it's quite timely in a number of ways. So yeah, well done.
Yes, Murray.
finally, really, that I really welcome this because it really fits in with the recommendations of the task force, and I can take this back to the Manufacturing Advisory Board and tell them we're on it now, really. So, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, well said. Yes, Mandy?
I think it's a good point about it as being lead-centric, but I know within the space agenda, we work as Space North across the whole of the Northwest, the Northeast and Yorkshire. And within Yorkshire, we work as the 4 ridings, not that there were ever 4 ridings, but you know what I mean. And I think the benefit of that is that if you're looking at inward investment from overseas, they see that distance as a state, if it's coming from the US, for example. So even if Leeds is the landing pad, I think then maybe the strategy has to be to then show them, you know, the benefits of moving outside, you know. And I think when you as long as we get them into Yorkshire and into West Yorkshire, then we need to then try and grow them and move them out to Halifax or Huddersfield or wherever else is important. So I just echo that, just get them here in the first place for the halo effect, and then grow them and move them if we can.
Laura?
Just slightly light on, just picking up your point, Mandy, that, you know, some of these countries, space to them is quite different to space for us, isn't it? If they're coming from the US or India even, you know, we're looking at space and we're looking at Leeds, and it might be a small little, you know, just a comparison of space is different, isn't it, really? When I'm abroad, I talk about coming from Leeds because people get that, you know, even though Dewsbury and Kirklees and all of that is very important to me. So,
of course,
yeah, obviously, I can't stop it.
Okay. Well, thank you very much indeed, everyone. The item 11 is for information only, so we won't be discussing that. There is a date and time for the next meeting, which I shan't be at. I forgot to say, were the minutes all right at the beginning? Miles, I think. You could minute that everybody was okay with the minutes, unless I'm hearing otherwise. And
Chair's action on that, Chair. I would say Chair's action on that.
oh yeah, yes indeed. We've already thanked Henry for his contribution. Also, we should mention Patrick Robinson, Louise's partner in crime here, and I know they work together on Louise's input there. Patrick's been a strong colleague of mine as well, particularly in the Made Smarter space. I'm sorry he's not here to thank in person, but I'm sure colleagues will take our thanks as a committee back to Patrick.
So, in Shabir's absence, I just want to say a few words to thank you, Andrew, for all your work in the last 9 years, supporting, guiding, leading on this agenda, and you're universally acknowledged as being a really, really strong advocate of your sector and the business community of West Yorkshire, a really kind of solid, rational approach to how you do things and how you've supported. And I know I've only worked with you for a relatively short time in the period, for only for the last kind of 14, 15 months, but I've really, really valued your support. And I know that people like Henry and Sarah that have been with you for the duration see you as made a phenomenal input to what we've done, and we couldn't have done a lot of what we've done without you. And I know that people like Mandy, I don't want to take the words to you, but you might want to share thoughts as well, has seen you as kind of a supporting person, was coming onto the committee and getting her kind of up to speed. And I know you've probably been that to other people as well. I don't know whether or not people want to share on the record, or whether we want to close the meeting officially and do something informal. But Chair, do you want to close the meeting?
Yes, well, with that. Very much appreciated all the support, yes, but mainly the friendships that I have around this table. And if I have a sadness now, it's really that I won't see some of you quite so often, although hopefully all of you a bit. So many, many thanks. And with that, let's shut the formal meeting. I don't know what we want to do now, but I'm certainly happy to